자, 오늘 포럼의 핵심 순서 하나이죠. 바로 기조 강연으로 곧장 이어갈 텐데요. 기조 강연의 주제가 문화의 차이를 넘어서 한국 기업의 해외 진출 성공 전략입니다. 앞서 두 분이 소개를 이미 해주셨는데 이분 곧장 모셔볼게요. 귀한 걸음 해주셨습니다. 세계적인 조직 문화와 변화 관리 전문 기업인 인시그니엄의 공동 창업자이자 대표이신 네이탄 로젠버그 대표님 모시겠습니다. 박수로 맞아주시길 바랍니다.
Mr. Beck and I began to talk about this occasion back in January. In particular, he asked me to talk about how important corporate culture is. We thought we'd give you a real case study, not talk about the theory of corporate culture. So to my fellow executives and business people, I dedicate this to you, and I hope that you find the next 30 minutes to be of value in a very practical way. I first came to Korea 18 years ago to work with the Korean subsidy of a U.S. company, H.J. Heinz. And on every other occasion that I've come to Korea, it's always been to either work with the U.S. or European company in Korea. So I'm really happy to share with you a case study of supporting a Korean company in the United States. 2 years ago, we met with the CEO of a company here in Korea, a very wise, very insightful man. And what he recognized was that the joint venture that they had with a very large U.S. company was likely to be unsuccessful. Why? Because of corporate cultures, because of clashing corporate cultures. And what he recognized was that what would make the difference is the leadership of that plant. So we worked with the team, and we had a very specific business result to produce. And one of the important things that I hope you take away from today, in most companies, corporate culture is an artifact of the past, usually a reflection of the founder's personality, usually something that over time just kind of grows. Instead, corporate culture should actually support the strategy and come from the future, not from the past. So in every company, there's what we would call the default culture. By default, we mean like a switch. It's got a spring. If you don't hold the switch down and let go, it defaults to the off position. Most companies default to whatever their past is given to make happen, to reinforce. In this company, the practical outcome of the cultural transformation was to support a successful start of production in the plant. And by working with the plant management, all the way down to people who were working on the assembly room floor, the factory floor, to install a culture of design that would pull for success. The measure we used was a successful start of production. The joint venture already had a plant in the United States, had established a benchmark, and the commitment in the new plant was to exceed that benchmark initially by 5% and then continue that success. I'd like in particular to talk about the barriers to success that were immediately apparent. First thing is, and I think everybody in this room probably already knows, American culture and Korean culture are very different. Our national cultures are at their very base very, very different. One of the things that I've learned about Korean culture is that the Confucian beginnings of Korean culture are still part of the national culture. In America, we started with the revolution, and Americans really like autonomy. And when you put those two together, you get culture clash. Secondly, the corporate culture of the Korean company a large, well-established, highly successful company, and the culture of the long-time American company also clashed with each other. The man who was the CEO of SAS Airlines back in the 1990s, Jan Carlson, said, "While we respect national cultures, what's important to us is the SAS corporate culture." And when we came into these two companies, there was actually a not above board, but kind of a below, under the table clash going on where one corporate culture was attempting to dominate the other corporate culture, and the other corporate culture was attempting to dominate the other corporate culture. Thirdly, and obviously, by the way, I speak no Hangul at all, our languages are very, very different. Very, very different. Not just in tone, but the alphabets are different. If I go to Spain, if I go to France, even though the languages are very different, I can kind of make sense of what it says in the newspaper. When I look at Money Today, I don't know what I'm looking at. So the language issue actually turned out to be one of the very big issues in this plant. Then management styles are very different. I think what are taught in Korean business schools, what are taught in American business schools are different. The hierarchical nature of Korean management is very different than the more, not a good term, but more of a soft approach to management in the United States. And then one of the big issues that we had to deal with all the way through is the executives from the two companies, not from the joint venture, but from the parent companies, did not understand their roles. I mean, literally, I remember standing in the central walkway of the plant, and one of the executives from one of the parent companies walked in and said to the plant manager, "Raise that ceiling by 2 feet." That's not the job of, in a joint venture, that's not the job of the executives from the parent company. In the United States, one of the things that makes doing business hard is we have multiple jurisdictions with very widely ranging regulatory and legal authority. So in this location, they had to deal with a very large utility to get the power that they needed to run the plant, the local city government, the local county government, the state government, and the US government. One of the things that I would say, given who one of the advisors to GK Insights is get a good lawyer in the United States. And then finally, we got started with the plant a little bit too late. In fact, the vice president of operations of the joint venture said, "We should have had you here at the beginning," because the clashes that had already started to build, we had to unwind. So where we started, and where I would recommend that all of you start, is where we start as leaders, and that is in the future. The playground for leadership is the future. Where the game of leadership takes place is in a place called the future. Every organization, going back to this term that I used earlier, default, every company has a default future. That default future looks like we're going to keep doing what we've already done that's made us successful. We're going to do it better, we're going to do it faster, and we're going to do it smarter, but we're going to keep doing what we call business as usual. In this case, the senior management of the plant sat down for a day and a half, and they confronted, if they kept going in the direction that they were going, what the future was likely to be. And what they saw was, while they would survive in that future, they didn't like that future. And so then we spent the rest of our time together in that day and a half designing a future that was inspiring, but also challenging. A future that was unlikely, unpredictable, but still doable. And what they said is, when our people grow, our company grows. And that was the core of the corporate culture. to recognize that the core of this company was not its technology, was not the two parent companies that were members of the joint venture, but the people who were working in the plant. Korean engineers, American engineers, and local production folks. The company empowers excellence and is an industry leader in quality, cost, and delivery. We're committed to develop and promote our people. Again, notice people first. Innovate and continuously improve production of benchmark product as one team. And I can tell you, when they wrote this, there was not one team. There were definitely two teams. There was the Korean team and there was the American team. We return our people and our customers safely every day to their homes. And part of building this plant, which, by the way, 2 years before the plant had been built, it was a cornfield, to reinvest in our people, our site, and our community. And that wasn't some flowery language. That was a promise that the top managers in the plant made to each other. Not to the boss, but to each other. Mutual accountability. They then made a promise for results. And if you look up here, by February 29th, they were going to exceed the orange line as the already existing plant in the United States, and they made a promise to exceed that by 5% and then continue to grow and continue to exceed the numbers of the plant. To do that, we invented and designed, custom designed for them an intervention, and that started by, again, going back to the chairman of the Korean company. His commitment is to develop leadership for the plant. So we worked with the two plant managers, the men and women who reported to them, and the men and a total of 8 directors in 3 sessions over the course of 3 months to develop them to be able to lead breakthrough. So let me take a little sidestep to talk about breakthrough. In most companies, breakthroughs are happy accidents. Mr. Hong talked about breakthroughs and the need for breakthroughs. In most companies, if you think of Post-it notes, if you know the story of Post-it notes, it was a glue that failed, and then they found a use for it. The jet age was enabled by a plastic called Lexan, developed by DuPont, and it was an experimental failure. So breakthroughs oftentimes are happy accidents. In other companies, we consult with every major pharmaceutical company in the world. And in pharmaceutical companies, because of the huge margins, one of our clients, GSK, has 1,000 molecules in their pipeline, hoping to get 2 breakthrough products out of it. But they have the margins that can afford that. And then you have huge expenditures of capital and human beings. Think of the U.S. effort to put a man on the moon in the 1970s, 1960s, and those efforts were the biggest expenditure outside of a war ever in the history of the United States. At Insigniam, through our research and development, we developed a process and a structure for intentionally causing breakthroughs. And from these leading breakthrough sessions that we did with the 8 directors, they came up with 5 breakthrough projects, 5 breakthroughs that were needed in order to actually meet their promise to beat the other plants' production numbers. And so those were headed up by one of the directors, and then they recruited people from every level and every function in the organization. And that's when the company started to pull together as one company, as one plant, not 2 teams. We continued to coach those directors and folks from other management roles and other supervisor roles. We would literally sit in an office and people would schedule themselves to come in for the coaching sessions. We consider coaching really important to managerial and executive performance. If you think about it, in every arena where performance counts, there are coaches. The best singers in the world, the best dancers in the world, all have coaches. The best athletes. I watched Korean baseball last night on the TV. And all those teams have coaches. And now the best executives in the world also have coaches. And then for the people at the next level, 23 people, the men and women who reported to those 8 directors, we worked with them to move from being really good managers to being leaders, called inspirational leaders, over 3 months. On the front line, we worked with people on their supervision skills, and then we, all the way through, interviewed people, surveyed people to make sure that the culture was actually taking hold. The results? In March of the following year, the factory met or exceeded the measures that defined a successful start of regular production. That is to say, the 8 directors kept their promise to cause a breakthrough in production. The metrics were established by the executives of the joint venture. So that is to say, the executives here in Seoul, the executives in the United States met and agreed on a set of metrics that would define success, and along with the plant management, Insigniam promised those results. The 5 breakthrough projects were all successful and enabled making that happen. And then there was a widely shared understanding of what success meant, and I think that's also a critical factor. In most companies, each division has their own definition of success. Each function has their own definition of success. And the problem with that is that's not what success is at the corporate level. And then finally, and the management was really proud of this, the surrounding community was really improved. Literally, managers from the plant would go into classes in the high school and teach mathematics and science to the kids. They donated back into the community, and that community is better for that joint venture being there, not just as an employer, but as a contributor to the health of the community. This is from one of the Korean executives in his report at the end of the start of successful production. And I'll let you read that to yourself. This is an outline that we used with the 8 directors at the plant to give them a step-by-step process to design and then, more importantly, to install a new corporate culture. And one of the agreements we had is it was not going to be the Korean company's corporate culture, and it was not going to be the American company's corporate culture, but it was going to be a culture from the future that would pull for the success of the start of production. So in the beginning, the first thing that you've got to do is you have to get a clear picture of this is the way it is. What are the facts of what we're actually dealing with? Not people's opinion, not what people like, not what people want, not what the past says, but today, what is actually so. And the way we talk about that is have one foot planted in reality. And then secondly, to take responsibility for the way it is. The parts you like, but also the parts that you don't like. And that's often difficult for executives because they want to blame other people for the way that it is. If you can't take responsibility for the way it is, you can't move on to create something new. And then a design session, like I talked about, that day and a half that we spent with the guys. At the time, I think they were all guys now that I think about it. The gentlemen who were the directors to what's the marketplace going to look like in the future? And then what kind of company would be really successful in that future? And then from that, what are 4 to 6 key behaviors? And then this is where the breakthrough comes in Insigniam's work in corporate culture. Our very first client was in the early 1980s when Mr. Peterson and Mr. Poling, who were the CEO and the COO of Ford Motor Company, realized that the corporate culture that Henry Ford had designed was no longer giving them the competitive advantage that they needed. It was actually impeding their ability to compete in Asia and in Europe. So what we discovered is if you change the conversations that people are having in your organization, their behavior will change. Just like if you move the head of a horse, that whole big body moves. If you change the conversations in your organization, and if you're taking notes, that's the one thing you should write down. If you change the conversations that people are having in your organization, their behavior will change on its own. Then we had the senior management live that behavior for 2 months to see if they could actually stick with it. The test. Could they break out of the old US company culture? Could they break out of the old Korean company culture and take on the new behavior? Then they designed a project that we call a Keystone Project. You know, the Keystone holds up the arch. The Keystone Project is a project that can only be accomplished in the new corporate culture. From that, they commissioned teams to work on aspects of it, started a communication campaign throughout the company, what we call an enrollment campaign. Senior management put together the enrollment team of early adopters, people who were enthusiastic about the changes in the company, and began to communicate that. And then the senior managers, and this again is important, not Insigniam consultants, but senior managers from the plant started to train their people, not just in the technical aspects of the plant, not just in the production aspects of the plant, but also in the corporate culture. And with that, I want to thank Mr. Beck, I want to thank Mr. Hung for the opportunity to be here. Tiger, thank you for your trust and the opportunity to share with your people. Mr. O, thank you also. And I look forward to our conversation in a little while. Thank you very much, everyone.